Hey there good people, my name is Scott and you are watching Sword and Shield Studio. Right now we're going to learn the basics of how to use displacement within Fusion. Now you can use displacement techniques to achieve a variety of specific effects, from waving grass to water ripple effects, text warping, and glitch effects even. I'm sure you're ready to dive in, so let's get right into it. So here I am on the Fusion page with the base of the composition I showed in the introduction, but without any displacement effects. There are a couple different assets included here. There is the grass image with a transparent background, an image of the clouds, the sky here that I applied a couple different effects to, and the displacement text in the foreground up here. I included a link to the project file along with all the assets I'm using here if you want to follow along, or you can try the following displacement techniques to your own project if you like. Say the first thing we want to do in this composition is make the grass appear as though it is waving in the wind. In order to do that, we will have to utilize a Displace node. To do that, left-click the grass media in node at the beginning of the node tree here and hit Shift Space on the keyboard and type DSP to search for the Displace node and hit Enter or click Add to add that. You will notice once you add a Displace node that it doesn't do anything right off the bat. You could play with the sliders in the inspector all you want, but it's not going to do anything yet. This is because the Displace node needs a map image fed into it, which will dictate which way our grass image here is displaced. In this case, I'm going to add a background node to the node tree, drag it from this background icon here at the top left, and feed it into the other input in the Displace node. Now you can preview what this background node will look like by left-clicking it and hitting 1 on your keyboard. And if you don't have it enabled yet, enable the dual viewer option at the top right of your viewer here to preview that background. Now right now this background is completely black, which means it is doing no displacement at all. We're going to change the type from solid color to gradient, which will change it to a black to white gradient image. And now you could see, if I make the preview a bit bigger, that as I adjust the gradient, the grass displaces in a particular way. Now how the Displace node is referencing this is it's looking by default for the Luma value, where mid-tone gray, this area here, is where the most displacement is going to happen, where areas that are pure white and pure black, there is no displacement happening. So you can see this in real time. As I adjust, if I move the gradient all the way over, there's no displacement because everything is white. And as I shift it back, you can see along that gray edge is where the grass is being displaced. Since mid-tone gray creates the area of most distortion in a displacement map image, we know that in order to have this grass ripple in a regular manner, as though there's a wind blowing through it, we'll need a repeating pattern of this color. So in the inspector of your background node, change either side of the gradient to mid-tone gray. You can double-click the color bar here to get to the color menu. And you can either enter RGB values of 128, 128, 128, or it's got a HTML hex number of 80, 80, 80. And that is mid-tone gray. So now one side of our gradient is pure mid-tone gray and the other is black, where there is no displacement happening. Next, set the repeat option in the inspector from once to ping pong. And after you do this, you can modify the gradient however you like. I think I'm going to scale this down some and leave it at a slant, because wind does not often come in a straight line. Now that we have the shape and color of the displacement map image set how we like it, next we have to animate the gradient to create the regular displacement that's going to make the grass appear as though it is moving in our composition. So in order to do that, scrub to frame 0 in your composition timeline and select the background node that's feeding into your Displace node. And in the inspector, set a keyframe for the offset value and leave that value at 0.0 for the very beginning. Decide at this point how long you want one movement of wind to take place, one breeze, if you will. In my case, I think I'm going to have the complete cycle of this gradient go through every 48 frames or 2 seconds, since this composition is 24 frames per second. So I'll go to frame 48 on my composition timeline and set a keyframe here and set this offset value to 2.0. Now you'll see in the background preview that the gradient looks the exact same. That's because an offset value of 2.0 is one complete cycle of motion for the gradient. So at frame 0 and frame 48, they will look the exact same. So that's great to have the grass animate for the first 48 frames of the composition, but we want this to loop over the entire course of the composition. So in order to do that, again, make sure you have your background node fed into the Displace node selected, and left click the spline editor at the top right of Fusion here, and check the offset value that we animated and hit zoom to fit. And I will hold Control and use my scroll wheel to go out a bit, and box select, hold left click and box select these 2 keyframes here, and hit the set loop option here. And what this will do is loop those 2 keyframes infinitely over the entire course of the composition. And so if I play this back, we've got a regular waving motion for the grass, and perhaps that's a bit intense. I might adjust the gradient, make it a bit bigger. And you'll have to play around with yours to get it how you like. I'm going to close the spline editor here. And grass usually does not move in an entire wave like this. It's typically the top and, about 3/4 down from the stalk of grass that moves. So in order to define a specific area of the grass that you want to move with your Displace node here, we'll have to mask our background node here. So drag a rectangle node down to your node tree, hook it up as a mask to the background with the blue connector, and adjust the size of this, size and position, till it covers about 3/4 of the grass, and increase the soft edge value. You might have to increase the scale on the x-axis so it covers the entire composition. If we play this back, You'll see how it looks a bit more realistic since the bottom of the grass isn't moving. Just a little detail to add some extra realism to this effect. Now that we know generally how displacement works, we can apply a similar effect to our displacement text in our composition here by selecting the text 1 text plus node here. Hit shift space, type DSP to add a displace node, hit enter, click add to add that to the node tree. And of course we know now that the displace node isn't going to do anything unless we have a map image fed into it. So I will drag another background node from our toolbar here on top of the node tree. Hook this up to the other input in our displace node. Left click that background node and hit 1 on my keyboard to preview it in my viewer 1 here. Change the type from solid color to gradient. Change one side of the gradient to mid-tone gray. Remember that is 128 red, 128 green, 128 blue, or 80-80-80 if you want to do the hex value. Hit OK. Set the repeat value of this gradient to ping pong. And I think I will just leave this relatively straight. Next, we will have to animate the offset value. So go to frame 0 of your composition timeline. Set a keyframe for offset at 0.0 at the very beginning. And I will go approximately 5 seconds in, so 120 frames, and set the keyframe for offset 2.0 to have it go 1 complete cycle, 5 seconds through the animation. Just so it's going at a different rate than the grass. You'll see as I play this back that the text is moving. And with the background node still selected, click the spline editor again at the top right of Fusion. And with the offset value selected, hit zoom to fit here. Hold Control and scroll out a bit. So you can hold left click and box select these keyframes and hit the set loop icon at the bottom here to loop that animation. And now, just like that, we don't need any masking on this one because we want to affect the entire body of text, but just like that, we have displacement effects applied to both our grass and our text. That does it for this tutorial. I hope that after watching this video you learned a bit about the basics of how displacement works in Fusion and begin thinking of different ways you can utilize these techniques to add some dynamic fluidity to your animation projects. If you did find this useful, please consider subscribing to the channel where I upload a video just like this one every week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.